How can we prepare during a wait time for our future dreams? That's the question we're going to be addressing today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Today, I have a beautiful young woman with me. Her name is Cally Logan. She's the author of two books, Dear Future Husband, A Love Letter Journey While Waiting for God's Best, and Hang in There, Girl. She's a senior writer for crosswalk.com and a 12th grade U.S. history teacher, in addition to serving as a mentor to several young women. She is from the Virginia area, and I'm so glad that she's here on Flourish-Meant today. Welcome, Cally.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
So tell us what kind of brought you on this journey to start writing these letters like you did in your book, Dear Future Husband. What was it like when you were in that waiting space, and what kind of prompted your heart to start preparing well for the dreams that God has for you in your life?
It's kind of a cool story because I actually started these letters 12 years ago when I was 18 and I'm 30 now. And at the time, my life was just changing so quickly. I was about to graduate high school and, all the fun things that go along with that and that big new chapter in life. And I really just began to consider that one day I did have that desire to get married, and I really began to pray about it more. And I felt that God was really watering that seed of desire that He had placed in my heart. And I considered that it was very clear I didn't know my husband at the time, but I wanted to share some of the ever changing things in my world with him. And so I kind of wanted to do like a message in a bottle to him. And so I started my own personal letters, and then it actually ended up becoming a book, which is really cool. But it's a little less autobiography and it's a little more open to just concepts and growth things that any woman could relate to.
That is so important to keep it relevant to people that are paying attention to this, listening to this. It's not just a memoir, it's something that they can take in their hands and make practical. So, for you on your journey, what was the most practical thing for you to do regarding your mindset when you were in that waiting time?
Yeah, I actually still am in that waiting time. But I think one of the biggest things is just focus on God because He holds the timeline of my life, of your life, of everyone's lives. And so realizing that I'm not late and I'm not too early, I'm right on time for what He wants as long as my eyes are set on Him. And I think that was one of the biggest revelations through writing the letters, through this whole journey in waiting, and even just the creation of this book, just seeing how God is so in every intricate detail. He holds all of it in His hands.
So, trusting God with every moment is kind of where you're talking about that mindset of waiting on God, not just waiting on the fulfillment of something you want.
Exactly. And it's developing that rapport with God, that relationship with God, that intimate relationship with God. Because whomever comes into your life, be it a spouse, be it a best friend, be it all in one, God should always be our first love. And that relationship with God should always be our best and most fulfilling and healthiest relationship of every relationship we have. So that was a really big thing that I learned over the past 12 years as well in that waiting period, that that's not going to change. God will always be number one, whomever He brings in, into my life. He will always have that first spot.
That's so healthy because when we put all of our heart and all of our hopes into a specific outcome, into a gift that God gives us that He may or may not give us the way we expect it, we can get easily disappointed. Can you talk about really managing your expectations so that you're not setting yourself up for disappointment?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that has become clear, even in the past year, was really dwelling upon Psalm 37:4. It says, if you delight yourself in the Lord, He will give you the desires of your heart. And so, thinking about the desires of our heart and where do those come from? Are those things that we are coming up with, or are those seeds that God has planted? And the answer to that is when we delight ourselves in Him. Because when we're finding our full fulfillment in God, when we are placing our will and our heart and our mind and our lives before Him at His throne and saying, God, as much as I can imagine, and I have a great imagination, I know you have your best for me. And your best is always going to exceed the greatest idea I could ever come up with for my best. you're really handing that over to him, handing that pen over to him and allowing him to flourish that and to grow that. And so you know that if he has you in that time period, you might have, those it's normal to be disappointed. I certainly thought I'd be married by 30. I thought I'd have some kids by 30. And when I passed my birthday this year, I did have some disappointment, but instead of dwelling upon that, I did allow myself to have those moments of grief. But I also looked at it and thought, well, I trust God more, and I know He's not forgotten. I know this isn't a no, it's just a not yet. And when He does bring those things forward, it's going to be all the more marvelous. So I think really just placing those things before Him and even giving Him our disappointments, even coming before Him humbly saying, Lord, I thought this would look different. I thought this would be different, but I am going to trust you because you do know what's correct. And just thinking about what Jesus said in John 13:7, you may not understand what I'm doing now, but one day you will. And like to look at that with curiosity. Like, well, it's not the way I would have written it, but I'm so curious what he's up to because I know one day I'll look back in retrospect and I would say God knew what was best. He did what was correct in that time period, and I'm glad he wrote it the way he did, and he didn't give me what I wanted instantly when I wanted it.
Such a deep maturity of faith in it. With all those things that you're saying about trusting God's timeline instead of making a plan and an agenda and a schedule by which we want these things done, that God has told us He may have promised us to do these things. These may be things that we really feel like we have prayed about and God has said yes on, and yet we're not seeing the outcomes by the time that we set. Then instead, you're saying, trust God with that timeline, trust God
Mhm.
with that schedule. We may not know all the reasons why He has the timeline laid out the way that He
Yeah.
does, but can we trust that He knows it better than we do? That's kind of the issue at the core, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and one of my friends put it this way recently, and I really loved it. He said, "When you plant a seed and you allow God to water it, there's a lot of time that seed spends under the dirt before you even see that little sprout, and so there's a lot of time just waiting and waiting and waiting with expectation, and, if you're trusting God, you're trusting the gardener, that seed will sprout and you will see that, but you have to wait while it's doing that work underneath the ground too."
And I'm thinking about Abraham and Sarah in the Old Testament. They
Yeah.
waited way longer for the promise of God. And in their case, it was for a child. And
Mhm.
they tried to make it happen on their own. And that had terrible consequences. Can you talk about recognizing the truth of, discerning between doing it on our own and making it happen and what God really wants us to do and how He wants us to wait on Him sometimes instead?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent story to bring up because you look at that where they did take it into their own hands, but they were not powerful enough to thwart the plan of the Lord. They did have consequence and they did take things, and you can't help but wonder if maybe it prolonged and delayed what the promise was to come into fulfillment, but they couldn't thwart the absolute specific detailed promise that God gave. He didn't give a promise with an asterisk and saying, well, it'll be Abraham's son, but not Sarah's. Or it will be, an adopted son by Sarah, not at all. He promised a son to them. And so I think when we look at that in our own lives, we really have to write it down specifically if we feel that God has given us a promise and we've prayed through it and we've made sure it aligns with scripture and everything else, looking at that and placing that before Him for Him to fulfill that in His timing and in His way. But I think we also have to look at it that we have to let Him have His way. We can't call the shots. We have to just take that next step of obedience and whatever that looks like. And a lot of times that obedience is just being willing to say, okay, it's not today, and that's all right. But what am I doing in the meantime? What am I growing in the meantime? What is God growing in me? And that's surrender, not just sitting there watching paint dry, but allowing Him to do those things and you as well. There's a lot of, I think, heart refinement work that happens in that time too.
That's an important point because I can see in you this maturity that has developed out of you waiting well. There's a difference between waiting impatiently and waiting well. And I think that you have chosen to intentionally trust God and put Him first instead of putting the blessings ahead of God and worshiping the blessings and making that your source of happiness. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I haven't always waited well. I want to put that out there. I think in my own specific journey. And I try to, really open up about that in the book too, so that other women who are feeling that pain, that ache. I think it's really an ache of loneliness and of waiting can relate to it as well. But I think I realized a few years ago that I had kind of made getting married almost an idol. And an idol isn't just this little, bronze calf that is made or gold calf, it's whatever we're putting between God and us. It's that middle thing. And I think for a little while I realized I was putting his promise as an idol between he and I. And I actually had a loving friend kind of call me out on it. And she said, I know that this is a heart desire of yours. And I know that there's not anything inherently sinful. You don't want to be married because you want some selfish gain, but I do think it's prohibiting you from growing more in God. And so I think you need to kind of put it to the side and just focus on Christ. And it rubbed me the wrong way at first, but then I calmed myself and my own flesh down, and I realized, yeah, I have made it an idol, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want that promise to be the end all be all, because it's not. God is the end all be all. And so I think just making sure that, our hearts are in the right place and our heart stature and our focus too, and just watching out for those little foxes, those things that will seek to eat away at us or seek to distract us, or anything can become an idol if we let it.
So we need to do a daily heart check to make
Hmm.
sure that God is first. And that would be one way to make sure that you are not making an idol out of the dreams and the blessings and the gifts that God has for us, that we're
Yeah,
keeping God first. So that's really important. I want to get
yeah.
into some more practical things in the second half of our conversation. But for now, I do want you to have an opportunity to share where people can find you and stay connected with you and also get copies of your books.
Yeah, everything is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all at christianbook.com. And then you guys can check me out on my website. I hang out on Instagram a whole lot. That's where I do a lot of things. So I'm Cally with a Y. It's a little different spelling, so sometimes people will spell it wrong. But yeah, Cally at Cally Logan for everything, for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and CallyLogan.com. I do devotionals and stuff like that every month and trying to stay connected. And I have some fun merch on there too.
So, in this second portion of our conversation with Cally Logan, I want to get into some practical tips on ways that we can tangibly center our hearts and our minds while we're waiting for a dream or a blessing that we truly believe is aligned with God's will for our lives, such as a future spouse. So, Callie, what are some specific techniques that we can apply toward that wait time to help us stay focused? Let's talk about some of that letter writing and some other things that you have encouraged people to do.
Yeah, I really have loved writing the letters, and I encourage girls I mentor. I actually even encourage friends to do it. Maybe not even just writing letters to your future spouse, but to future you, to your future children, if you feel that God is calling you to be a parent one day, things like that. Because I think realizing that the you that you are today will not be the you that you are a year from now. So kind of encapsulating that memory of who you were, and being very honest and vulnerable to the comfort zone that you feel within, those pages in the pen. And sometimes that's a place that you're just in prayer journal, and sometimes that's a letter that you're going to write to share with somebody, but saying, these are things I'm struggling with right now, these are the things God's teaching me right now, these are things I'm learning about myself right now, these are journeys and things that I'm learning about friends or the environment around me, this is where I'm working in jobs and things. And I think, when we look back, that is such a gift to look through those letters, through those things. And I think that's one way you can definitely wait well. I think the other is investing in community, investing in your friend group, and being really discerning with whom you are spending your time with, because your time is one of your most valuable resources that you have. So looking at, am I investing my time well? Am I investing it in godly people? Am I investing it in people that are healthy for me, that are encouraging me and who I'm becoming and where I'm going? Things like that. Am I investing it in church or maybe family relationships? Perhaps you're investing it in your career and your job, and where you feel that your field, your mission field is. Because even if you're working in a cubicle, God has you there for a reason, and that is your mission field. A lot of the conversations around water coolers and stuff can have a lot more impact than we even know. So I think that's another way we can really wait well as well.
I love those two things. And I kind of want to unpack those a little bit. That first part, where you're writing to your future self is framing your present with hope for the future. And I love that concept for that reason, because you're looking toward a growth mindset. You're looking toward where you're going to be as if you're not staying where you are. So I love that. I love that
Yes.
because that's getting your mind to think in forward terms, not feeling stuck, not sitting still. And the second one does that too, but it does it with activity, making sure that you're not just waiting in dormancy. You're waiting in a way that grows you either spiritually, mentally, or in skills and actually applying yourself toward being purposeful for the kingdom of God, or maybe all of those things.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some other practical things that we can be doing. What are some ways that we can discover how God might be calling us to do things that prepare us now while we're waiting? Just like in the story of Joseph, he was in places that held him back and restrained him from his purpose, but they didn't just restrain him. God used those to train him.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes into just that, daily investment with God. I think, spending that time with the Lord and being very open. But I think being really good listeners is a big facet of that. Being willing just to calm yourself, to, turn off the phone, turn off distractions, and just having that prayer closet and just being willing to sit and listen. Because a lot of times our first instinct with God is to do all the talking, to say, these are the things I want, these are the things I'm scared of, these are the things I'm hoping for, everything else. And it's a rare time that we just actually sit before him in his presence. And I think there's a specific time for worship. I think there's a specific time for intercession. I think there's a specific time for request. But I think there really needs to be time and focus on just listening and allowing him to speak to us. And perhaps putting an idea or spark of an idea of something that we wouldn't have even guessed for ourselves. And then, seeking that out, searching that out, and seeing that maybe he does have a specific facet of that. We're looking at where you're planted now, like with Joseph, we look at the first part of his life, well, the kind of the mid part of his life after his teens of, being sold into slavery and ending up in prison, and think, oh my gosh, he must have been in so much despair and dismay. But I think about it and I think, well, but look at what he was doing while he was in prison. He had been given this wonderful gift of not only dreaming and having dreams from God, but being able to discern what God was saying in dreams. And so he was looking at where he was, which was behind bars, but he was using his gifts well. So I think even looking at in yourself, do I have, maybe I have the gift of encouragement. Maybe I have the gift of intercession. Maybe I have dreams, things like that. And looking at how can those be used where I am now, and what does God want to grow in them? How does he want to strengthen that muscle? And maybe that's kind of, a discussion too, just to sit down with the Lord. Lord, you gave me this gift. So what are we going to do with it? Because you didn't give me this gift to keep hidden under a lampshade. I know you want this to be used. So what does that look like currently in this season? Are we in a season of training? Are we in a season of doing?
And we might be in a season of both, just like Joseph, because what he
Exactly.
was doing didn't look like it was preparing him for
Yep.
second in command role, but it was. If he
It
hadn't learned
was.
to manage all the resources for Potiphar, if he hadn't learned how to run the jail, basically he was put in charge of running the jail while he was a
Yep.
prisoner. So he
Yep.
learned all of those leadership skills while he was in captivity. And yet God used that to make him ready for the role that he would fulfill in the fulfillment of that dream that he gave him so long ago. But his character and his
Exactly.
skills had to be built. So sometimes our waiting is a character building process and a skill building process. And like you said, really listening to God and trusting that he can work with you where you are to prepare you for the dream that he has next. And that may have to do with your relationships, like a relationship with a spouse. How do
Mhm.
you think God has prepared you in these letter writing processes for becoming the spouse that you are meant to be, and also helping you recognize the spouse that's meant for you?
I love that question. I think one of the biggest things I realized is God's openness to inviting me to be a little more vulnerable, but also to be prayerfully minded, to really praying for my future spouse. And that was something, a concept that seemed so vague when I was young because he almost seemed like this imaginary figure. And I wanted to pin things, but I thought, well, I don't really know anything about him. But God does, and so I kind of look at it, well, we have a mutual friend in Christ because I know he'll be a believer because that will be very clear to me. But looking at and asking God, what are the things that you want me to desire in a spouse, and tell me more about him. Please set my heart in expectation. So I really started to pray for him more, and it was an unnatural habit at first, and now I do it without thinking. And it's an everyday practice now just to be in prayer for him wherever he is, because he's doing something on this earth. I just don't know what he's doing today, And I think also too, just being willing to be vulnerable. I think there are, our hearts can be ones where they have several layers where we might be willing to share with a friend or a girlfriend or something like that, certain layers, but then there are those really intimate, intricate things that we wouldn't really want to tell anybody. But I found in letter writing that because it is a message in a bottle, that you can share these really vulnerable heart things, and it is safe to do so. Because if you're going to spend the rest of your life with somebody and they are going to be that best friend and that spouse, and you're going to be their rib, then you want to be able to share those vulnerable things. So I think that was a big thing that God invited me into as well, is just being willing to be vulnerable, which I'm really grateful for, and that path and everything else. And I think too, God has really trained me up just to be really aware of some of the things, to be recognizing, when I meet a young man or whatever, being discerning. And so to answer your question about, like kind of how will I know? I think God will make it very clear. And any relationship that I have, be it friends, be it a potential dating partner, anything, I really do take that to the Lord, and I ask the Lord, what do you desire from this? Because if this is not what you have for me, then I don't want to even allow my thoughts to wander. I want to capture them before they start going off with the wind.
That's beautiful. And I'm thinking about how many people are out there now that have been single for a while. It's different to enter into relationships after you've been accustomed to doing things your own way. How do you feel these letters can help prepare the hearts of people who are single for a while to be accommodating of that other person in their lives once they enter into a relationship? You can get pretty set in your ways pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, when you're writing letters, you're being intentional about thinking about the other person. And so I think it begins to form the other person in your heart and your mind. And I think inviting the Holy Spirit into that, Holy Spirit is preparing you for the other person, even little quirks. I have gone as far as to ask God, are there anything that particularly I wouldn't have as preference that I should be aware of in a future spouse, that I can start to be a little bit more tenderhearted towards or more patient towards, and things like that. And kind of being willing that just because I do something a certain way and I have for several years doesn't mean it's the only way. And that's okay too, and being open to that. Or looking at it, what are healthy forms of communication that we could have, so that if he is also set in his ways, that he is used to doing something solo or on his own, or if he was raised in a family that they, had holidays a certain way or something like that, what are ways we could have good, healthy communication to come towards compromise, so that no one feels that they got the short end of the stick, but instead they feel like, I felt really heard, and I felt really known, and I felt like my opinion mattered, and we came to this new tradition, or we came into this new understanding, or this great healthy communication to find a solution without there having to be an argument or upset or anything else.
That's wonderful advice coming from someone who's never been in a relationship. That's very insightful and a very important way to look at future relationships. If you prepare yourself ahead of time to be receptive, respectful, and to be a good listener and be willing to work things out diplomatically instead of being hard hearted, that's really a great way to approach any relationship, especially the one that you want to stay in peace with the person that you are living with for the rest of your life. So
Yeah.
that's really, really super great advice. Any other things that you want to make sure listeners know about writing to their future husband, or staying in a place of feeling not sick with that deferred dream, but being in a place of fulfillment, even if you're single, even if the dream, whatever it is, has not happened yet?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just knowing not a single moment is wasted, kind of that consistent theme of that you have a very specific timeline, that we are made by such a wonderful and creative creator, that, we're not all cookie cutter, and we don't all have the exact same life over and over. And that's such a gift. So you are in your own unique timeline, and looking that God has a very specific use for the season that you're in. And really, in the second half of the book, I really kind of focus in and hone in on a lot of the things that I had noticed a lot of women around me had gone through in their season of singleness or that they were working through now. Some of the topics I have, found that God had worked out in me, even conflict management, things like that, or little habits that I had that I noticed God was working on. But I think too, just being very honest with God and the things that you're feeling and bringing that before Him. So I think I would just really want to encourage listeners that no time is wasted by God. And even if you feel like you're behind or all your friends are married and they're having kids and things like that, it doesn't mean that you somehow woke up too late for the school bus and you missed it and now you're without luck. But that God is a good father, and that if you have kind of strayed away from his will, if you've gone your own way and you've done things that you know you weren't supposed to do, it just takes one step back to get back with God. And all you have to do is call upon him. And so you have not ruined God's plan for your life, that he loves you and that he always has a solution, no matter how dark it looks. Our God, if he can raise Lazarus from the dead 4 days later, he can certainly clean up any mess that we have. So I think looking at it too, if you're thinking, man, I just went my own way, and how is this where's the solution? Just calling upon him. So I really want to encourage listeners that God is for you and he has a good plan for you, and he is trustworthy. He is somebody we can trust.
So powerful and so inspiring. I think this could probably inspire young men as well that are single. What do you think about that?
That's my hope too. I have thought about that a lot. I'm actually doing a speaking conference in a few weeks in Minnesota, and we actually decided to make it open to all because I really think that for young men, and I have a younger brother, he's 5.5 years younger than me, and he's single. He's waiting for God to bring him his wife. But a lot of the conversations that we've had too, I think young men have this desire in their heart. They might not dream up their weddings, but I think they do have that desire that they want to share their lives with somebody. And so I think, whether they write letters or they just decide to pray for their wife, I think that there's a beautiful invitation for them and their seasons. And I think God has such a heart for men right now, too, that he wants to do a good work in them and refine them and build them up to be first a son of God Most High, and then ready, to be the Adam to the Eve, and to be a good leader and a good husband.
Thank you so much for sharing this wonderful message on flourishment today. How can people stay connected with you and get a copy of each of your books and maybe hire you as a speaker or any of the other things that you would like to connect with them on?
Yeah, CallyLogan.com. That's Cally with a Y. You guys can check me out there. I've got devotionals I do every month. There's book links, crosswalk articles, some merch and stuff too. I'm also very active on Instagram, Twitter, all the social medias, Facebook, everything. So I like connecting with people on there. I like sharing little videos. And on my website, particularly, there's a little link for contact if somebody would like for me to come speak. I love doing that. I have a couple set for the rest of the year, which I think will be a lot of fun. And of course, Amazon, christianbook.com, Barnes and Noble, you can find the books there.
I hope that all of you listening were inspired and encouraged by this wonderful conversation and the tips that we shared from Cally Logan's book, Dear Future Husband. And of course, I also hope that you come back for the next episode of Flourishment. Flourish-Meant is part of the Spark Media Network and can be found on the Edify app.